Thank you very much, Fatma, and thank you very much, Ursula, for inviting me to come to this workshop to share my experiences about family language policy research with many of you. So today I'm going to talk about the role of the parental language ideology and practices in the process of bilingual acquisition. Much of my work, much of the work I present here is underpinned by, family language policy. The fact that with the increased transnational migration in recent years, raising bilingual children has become a widespread phenomenon. When people, cross borders, integrate into new cultural and linguistic landscapes, and create multilingual families, or simply as a consequence of the government language policy in schools and in educational policy. So the phenomenon has not only drawn interest to parents, but also drawn attention from scholars, educational practitioners, and policymakers. So the essential analytical point of family language policy focuses on how family members make sense of the multiple languages they use in their everyday lives, and what decisions parents have to make with regard to which language they want to continue to develop, or which language they have to let go. So this research in the field has very important implications because it can help us understand both at the family level and at the school level how we can provide a conducive linguistic and educational environment to best support children with multiple languages. So I'm very proud to say that I have granted with this ESRC grant, where I'm working with Professor Li Wei from UCL and Professor Zhu Hua from Berwick. In this collaborative work, we're looking at what types of family language policy exist in the UK, how family language policy is established, what practices are managed and negotiated. So we have our website. It is still under construction, but we try to put a little bit information over there. You can follow us on Twitter. We have a Twitter account. We have also a Facebook account. And we are currently developing a national survey that we will put it up on our website. It's almost done. We're trying out now for a couple of pilots and to see what items we have designed or constructed should be taken out. Should we make? How should we make revisions and changes in the survey? And then I think in the beginning of next year, we will send it out. So you're all welcome to have a look and have a go and fill in the form for us. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about family language policy. And I think many of you probably know what family language policy is and what does family language policy do. But still, because I've already prepared my slides, so I better just use it anyway. Family language policy is defined as explicit and overt, as well as implicit and covert language planning by family members in relation to language choices and literacy practices within home domains and among family members. The explicit and covert language policy refers to the deliberate and observable efforts parents made and the conscious involvement and investment they put into children's language development. The implicit and covert language planning refers to the default language practices as a consequence of ideological beliefs. Like any other language policy, family language policy has three overlapping components. That's language practices, language beliefs, and language management. Language practices refers to the everyday language practice, that what do they do, what family members do in the family, is habitual language practices in the family. And language beliefs refer to the kind of a language, the values that family members ascribe to certain languages in their family. And language management, which is also language planning, refers to what kind of strategies and concrete language activities they do in home to maintain a language or to develop a language. Many of you are familiar with OPAL, One Parent, One Language strategy, and there are other strategies such as shared reading activities, read to children in both languages, and certain languages on certain days. You know, the parents have different ideas how to practice their language, how to maintain the language. So, family language policy draws on theoretical frameworks of language policy, language socialization, and child language acquisition, as well as literacy studies. So, it basically bridging the gaps between language policy and child language acquisition theory. As such, the study of family language policy not only contributes to our understanding of the process of language shift and change, it also sheds light on broader language policy issues at a societal level. So we normally look at family language policy from two forces. We call it external forces and internal forces. I'll come back to the external forces in a while. And internally, we look at the home literacy environment, parental expectations, parental education and language experiences, and parental knowledge about bilingualism. Okay, so for example, Kendall King's study, Kendall King and Lynn Fogel, they have studied a group of middle class English parents, well, English-speaking parents, let's put it that way, in the States. And they found out that this group of parents will often consult parental magazines to understand how they can raise bilingual children. Okay. But if we look at this diagram, and we look at family language policy in the center, and in the center we have home language environment and parental background. Okay, those are internal forces. But the internal forces is also influenced by education policy, okay, and the larger social cultural environment. So the external forces, you can see them at the four corners: social-linguistic context, socio-economic context, social-political context, and social culture context. This is because a family doesn't really live in vacuum or isolated from the larger environment. On the contrary, they interact constantly with the larger environment through the medium of language in the process of language socialization. So we put this, two theories together: language socialization and child language development. If you look at the circles, encircling the inner component of family language policy and the outer settings of external forces, they basically separate the two parts, right? But with the dotted line, it works almost like a permeable membrane, okay, allowing external forces to penetrate into family domain. And at the same time, the internal forces also come out the other direction. Okay, so you see that the two ways of socialization in this context. So very importantly, there is this context between macro level policy and micro home language policy. So the state national policy is often one of the most influential factors that contribute to parental decisions on whether they provide continuity for intergenerational transmission or resistance to language shift. Pierre Lane's study in Norway look at a group of Kvin speakers. They found out the Norwegianization policy actually has a great influence on parental decision whether they should continue with their children's language development in Kvin. Eventually, they all ceased speaking Kvin to their children because the government says it is not really good for you to speak Kvin for your children. That will prevent you children from developing, their academic ability or language ability. And my own study in Singapore has also looked at the kind of, national policy and the influence of national policy on children's bilingual development, which I could introduce you a little bit more. Because of the nature of families as a social units, there is the inherent link between the connections or LPP connections between the macro level and the micro level. As such, the study of family language policy can shed light on broader language policy issues at societal level, and most importantly, the study of family language policy can make visible the relationships between private domains and public spheres, and reveals the conflicts that that family members must negotiate between the realities of social pressures, political imposition, and public education demands on the one hand, and the desire for cultural loyalty and linguistic continuity on the other. While macro political decisions have a strong influence on family language policies, parental beliefs about their children's ability can be a decisive factor in forming family language policy at a macro level. Such micro-level beliefs are instantiated through parental expectations for their children's bilingual development, or what Annika de Hove called impact beliefs, where parents see themselves as more or less capable of or responsible for raising bilingual children. Gabriela Paris studied a language shift phenomenon of a group of speakers in San Lucas. She found that the parents from that group of minority group, migrant parents, have very little confidence in themselves or lack of this impact belief in raising bilingual children. They felt like they can't really control their children's language behavior. Whereas my study, looking at Chinese parents, migrant parents in Canada, shows the opposite. They feel like the responsibility relies on them, to provide conditions and context for language development. So we all understand now that ideology is the driving force for language policy. Okay, so what is language ideology? I have basically defined it. I mean, many other people also define it more or less a similar way to say that language ideology actually is basically language users' evaluating perceptions and conceptions of language and language practices. In this context, language ideologies are socially constructed and is highly associated with economic values, political power, and historic roles and social utilities. So language ideologies can lead to different practices and management decisions in the family. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to introduce or basically use some of the data that I have collected over the years in Canada, Singapore, and UK to show you how beliefs and goals and expectations are manifested in language practices and management decisions. Okay, so I will talk about the major beliefs that I found through my data. Basically, beliefs about language, whether it's positive or negative, what kind of beliefs about language actually are used as the foundation of driving forces for parental language decision. And then I will show you some examples of practices in families. And lastly, I want to show you the sort of expectations are translated into interventions within families. In much of the data I used here, we can see that language beliefs are basically has several or influenced by several factors. Parents normally see languages provide access to knowledge, resource, and economic benefits. And they also see language has a close relationship with the cultural and ethnic identity. And these beliefs tend to be influenced by their past experiences, such as migration trajectories, language learning experience, primary and secondary socialization, and also parental cultural disposition, such as their impact belief, whether it's their responsibility or someone else's responsibility towards education. What I want to emphasize here is that even though parents have very strong positive beliefs about the benefits of learning multiple languages, but they rank languages differently. Okay, certain languages have more value than the other. So now I'm going to show you some of the data I've collected. I just want to mention that much of my work is based on ethnography study and with a quantitative orientation, qualitative orientation, not quantitative study, but I do use surveys as well. I look at conversational analysis or interactional analysis within family domains. So this is an interview that I have conducted in Canada. It's one of my favorite quotes. One of the immigrant parents in Canada, Chinese, and she said, language is like a door that enables you to reach the world. When you learn one language, you get to know one part of the world. When you learn other languages, you get an opportunity to know other parts of the world. It's like a window opening up to you one by one. You can learn many things and acquire knowledge through languages. So this meaningful and expressive metaphor Mrs. Chi used in describing language as a window to the world captures the essence of the powerful roles languages play in our lives. And she also acknowledges that the possession of a language almost equals to the possessing of knowledge. And similarly, other parents also view language as knowledge. And here we have another parent, Mrs. Wang, said, looking at education and language from two different perspectives. At the personal level, you have an education, you improve yourself, okay? Educationally, the job-wise, right? But from the point of outlook on life in general, you actually contribute to the society. So benefit yourself with the language, benefit yourself with education, basically benefits also the society. And she argues that as to language, knowledge and language are closely associated. If there's no language, where would language come from? Or where would knowledge come from? So learning language equals to having knowledge. There are beliefs about education and about language really it's so strong rooted in their upbringing in China, and we call it Confucius, ideology basically. So you believe in language, you believe in education. So this powerful beliefs has actually influenced them and shaped their behavior into higher expectation and aspirations for their children's education and language development. But language is not only associated with this powerful image of education and knowledge. One of the parents also mentioned, of course, we have to consider the practical values of languages. This study is conducted in Quebec, where 3 languages are learned by children. Chinese as a home language, and French as the official language, or uni-language actually, that's a monolingual French province Quebec is. But all children learn English at the same time without any formal instruction, among this group of participants. So Mrs. Chen continues to say that I often tell my daughter that the Chinese are the 3rd biggest population in Quebec. So if you want to be a doctor, and if you know Chinese, French, and English, you will be able to deal with the patients from China, Quebec, and people who speak English. So viewing English or viewing language as a economic value here, it's very clear. So make the parents also invest more. Even though English is not the official language in Quebec, but parents tend to invest a lot of energy, effort, and education opportunities for their children to learn English. And language is, of course, also related to culture and social identity, where one of the parents, Mrs. Wang or Mrs. Lin, says, why the kids have to learn Chinese? It seems such a natural thing. It's like the children are Chinese, and if you don't learn some Chinese, it will be a great pity. I think when they grow up to a certain age, they must ask, who am I? So the question of who am I is really, really important for the parents as well. And they also want to have this kind of connection between their children. If they don't have the language, they can't communicate with their children. So the powerful words they use, a natural thing, great pity, who am I, all reveal how much parents ascribe the value of Chinese language in this context. However, not all parents view language the same way, or at least not the same, all languages the same value. This is an interview that we conducted with a mother in the UK who's from the Pakistani Urdu-speaking background. And she says, I do view English as having more importance over Urdu because I don't want my child to fall behind at school or anything to hinder their learning. It's not the belief that Urdu is less important. Urdu has a different importance. My child will learn Urdu so they can speak to their grandparents and other family members. Speaking Urdu is more important. Reading and writing in Urdu is not so important. My child will not need to read and write Urdu for anything. It's pointless. So you can see the expectations from her children actually, and her view of the importance of English and Urdu are reflected through her expectations and her management planning activity for her child as well. Later on, I will show you. So this is roughly the kind of, ideologies we found through parental discussion about why they choose certain languages in their family. So this kind of, ideologies coming through the conversations we had with them. And these beliefs, of course, are influenced by their past experiences. And their language abilities and language learning experiences and migration experiences. And Mr. Pan, he is a very successful postdoc, has done a lot of work and educated in China, North America, worked in Germany and here and there, but he still can't find a job. So when we interviewed him, he said, why, how should I put it? It doesn't matter what kind of degrees you have, diplomas actually, neither how many articles you've published. You're doomed once you open your mouth. Your English is obviously not the same as native speakers. Your presentation skills and oral ability just can't come to par with that of the native speakers. The only choice left is to change your career. That's why the importance of language can't be overestimated. With English language, you have schools to go to and careers to pursue, and you have the language. Otherwise, there's no way you can compete with others. So that's his view because of his own experiences. And he changed his career. He's not a postdoc in some, I can't remember what he did, but he changed to a computer programmer because it doesn't really need lots of conversation to deal with people and communication with people. So this is exactly how he felt about language skills. And so that's why he's very pushing towards his daughter's language learning in English. Okay, now I'm going to show you some examples that I have collected over the years and to look at how language ideologies are manifested in language practices. I'm using the Singapore data here. And Singapore is a tiny island. I'm sorry, over here. It's a very, very small island city or island nation where there are 3 major ethnic groups cohabit in that little red dot. You can see it. So majority of Chinese and some Malays and Indians and others who are Arab and Eurasian and so on and so forth. And Singapore adopted a bilingual policy where they recognize 4 official languages, that is English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil. Okay, the 3 languages, mother tongues, we call it, they call it, mother tongues are designated mother tongues, are not necessarily the language, the real home language they use at home because, for example, Chinese community has a variety of 11 different varieties of dialects. So people use Hokkien, Cantonese, and Hakka in their families, and the Malaysia also has quite a few varieties, and so do the Indians. And in this policy, English has been given a prestigious position. It is the language for wider communication, intra and intercommunication, communities language, and it's the language of modernity, also the language of economic value, because if you go out to look for a job, you have to know English. So bilingualism in Singapore is not any combination of 2 languages. It means English plus your mother tongue. Okay. Whereas mother tongues are treated as repositories of tradition and culture. So you see the dilemma among parents actually, why they would choose English, okay, over for mother tongues. So Singapore recently has seen a language shift drastically from mother tongues to English, and from a variety of mother tongues to the standard language. So this study is situated in this language shift phenomenon, where I took some pictures just to show you that how little mother tongues are seen in public. So this is just an ordinary shopping mall where you don't really see one letter of mother tongues, I think. I haven't really spotted any, but if you can see, then you can tell me. And this is in the library, public library. You don't see any mother tongue sign, even for book drop. So it's all written in English. So this situation is really sad in a way. We have talked about ideology earlier. So we all believe that all ideologies are driving forces for language policy, but language policy do not always lead to desired language outcome. And language ideology, within a family or a society, there are many different types of language ideologies. Sometimes do not agree with each other. So these incongruent ideologies can lead to conflict practices and views about language. And so this can also lead to different conflictual management decisions within the same family. Now I am going to introduce you to the Chiu family, a Chinese family, where they have one mother, one father, and grandparents living. Grandmother actually, a grandmother, father, and aunt, great aunt and uncle. No, a aunt and a great uncle living all in this family. It's very, very typical in Asia, where you have 4 generations living under the same roof. So in this family, it's very, very interesting. They have different ideologies. The mother and the father disagree with each other, and the grandmother disagree with all of them. So it's very interesting. I'm only showing you the mother and the father's ideology. The father says, we didn't really give him opportunity, Trevor, that's their son, we didn't give him opportunities to learn Mandarin and Hokkien. Hokkien is the family language. So we start using English when speaking to him in the past. No balance between Mandarin and English. We shouldn't have done that. By then, we thought English was very important, and learning Mandarin and Hokkien could interfere with his English. So we started speaking to him in Mandarin mixed with English. That was because we didn't want him to grow up speaking bad English like us. So it ended up with him using English both at home and at school. And the mother sees it differently. Mother has insisted using English since Trevor was born. So it is basically one parent, one language strategy in the family. But in Singapore, language phenomenon is so complex, you can never really find a pure language in any given context. You hear mixings, translanguaging constantly. So it's becoming a model, a pattern of language use in Singapore. So the mother said, I'm okay with it, less proficient in Mandarin. I will not stop him from learning English in favor of Mandarin. Mandarin is Chinese, eh? After all, English is still the dominant language in Singapore and the world. And English is becoming more and more important. This is why I decided that I would speak English to him when he was born. Even China is start speaking English now. My stand is very clear. I only expect him to learn English well. As for his Chinese, I don't mind him having a good command of it, but definitely not at the expense of his English. So you see the clear view of English versus Chinese in the family. Actually, family language is so complex because Hokkien is the language between the family members. And grandma doesn't speak any other language but Hokkien. So the mother and father communicate with the grandmother in Hokkien, where the mother speaks only English to Trevor, and the father speaks mixed English and Chinese and Hokkien. Very complex. Well, their family language policy was established against the backdrop of a social political reality in Singapore. Because in Singapore, a person's success is determined by your proficiency in English, not by your proficiency in mother tongues. And if you go to university, they will look at your English proficiency. The language of instruction in Singapore is also in English. So you see the consequences by having a national policy in turning people's language outcome and language decision and language ideology in this case. Another family, a Malay family, where also a large family, the younger aunts living together in this family. So mother, aunt, having different views. The mother believes speaking Malay is very important to keep our culture, and this is what makes us Malay. But the aunt sees very differently. Aunt number one says, I think it is important to speak Malay at home, but it's not important to speak, but it's also important to speak English to my little niece. When they go to school, they have to communicate in English. The even younger aunt, she says, I think maintaining the use of the home language is not as important as introducing and exposing my niece to English language, especially in this ever-demanding education system in Singapore. They will be entering primary 1 next year, and therefore the need to be able to speak, understand, and write in English. So the view is very, very different because the aunt sees the educational challenge for her niece in school, whereas the mother says, okay, we should really keep Malay going. And then you see the clear demarcation between the use of language outside and the language at home. This is what they do, actually. If you look at ideology and practices within the family. The mother said it's very easy to speak English, but you need to use Malay because Malay contains, endearment, emotion, all that sort. So you need to keep up using Malay because that will make you feel so closer to your child. But in reality, all her language you can see with the child has only 2 Malay words, which are addressing terms. Ibu is mother, sayang means my love, darling. All the other conversation is taking place in English. Okay? And this is very clear here if you see this dialogue. And Mrs. Amin says, Adna, that's the daughter, said, there's something in my nose. And the mother said, having nose problem. And then she calls the helper, domestic helper, and said, Biki, purple medicine. I don't really know how to speak Malay. And then the little brother, Mickey, mimic his mother and says, purple medicine. And the mother said, you are full of nonsense. Instead of giving him the correct input, the mother didn't really say anything, just say what we call a move-on strategy. It's what Lanza calls, the 5 strategies. Move-on strategy, understand what the child is saying, but without any intervention. And then Mickey says, gave that purple medicine, and then Adina says, challenge him, so are you a Malay or not? If you're Malay, speak some, correct Malay. And then the mother says, why don't you speak Malay and see whether she understands, whether the domestic helper understands you. And then Mickey just string a few words together, which doesn't really make any sense. Just putting, Malay words together. And the mother didn't really say anything. Just tell him, this is what you say. So from this conversation, you can see the default language actually is English. Okay, so from the unmarked code, you can see that. So that means the mother does not really provide any Malay input in the family, although she claims that she believes language, Malay language, contains culture value and emotional value and so on and so forth, but she doesn't really use it. And she has the repertoire. She has a very rich repertoire, but she doesn't really use Malay for her child, and she only uses Malay with a domestic helper. This is an Indian family where you also see ideology and language practice. In this family, the mother, she is Kavita. She is actually a school teacher, and she says learning both languages helps us to be effective bilinguals. Okay, she said, I want my child to be a good bilingual as well, by speaking and writing both English and Tamil at a very high level. But she doesn't really define what high level is. So this can be interpreted by people, from different background. Okay, so what happens in that family is that if you can see that story time, the reading, the little boy is reading and constantly reminded by his aunt and grandmother to elicit vocabularies in Tamil. It's almost like a foreign language situation. The child is ventriloquate vocabulary. It's like a teacher giving you an instruction and you repeat. So in this way, how can you expect a child to become a balanced bilingual or a high-level bilingual? Okay, so it's elusive. I call it elusive, language expectations. Okay, I move on quickly to the UK situation, which is a study that we conducted last year. We look at Chinese community, Urdu, Pakistani community, and Italian English community. The purpose of the study is to look at how ideology and aspirations are turned into measures and strategies. We choose the three communities because they're coming from a very different background with the migration history and linguistic background. The Chinese have high expectations for academic success, and is very demanding as a Chinese child in any context. The Italians are young families. They consider themselves as expat. Most of the families are intermarriage families. And then we have this Urdu-speaking Pakistani families. They are mostly the second or third generation children or families. So English has become the first language for them in many situations. Okay, so in terms of the language practices, it's very interesting to look at the Chinese almost use Chinese constantly, even between siblings, where when it comes to Italian families, and you will see half and half. And when it comes to Urdu family, you find very few actually use their home language for communication. Most of them would use English, okay? And we also ask them in terms of their language management measures. We look at the literacy practices at home, whether they read themselves or they read to their children. Then we also have different numbers you see here. And the Chinese families tend to read in English, but read very little, the parents read very little in Chinese. The Italians were equal, they read both Italians and English. The Urdu families read also very little in Urdu families, so they don't really transmit the knowledge to their children either, where Chinese don't read that much in Chinese either, but they do read quite a lot in English, and so on and so forth. See? And we also ask them how many books do their children own, because this reflects the kind of resources children have to develop their languages. And we found out, very interestingly, the Urdu families have fewer resources, and the Chinese and Italians have quite, similar resources. But in terms of visiting libraries, the Urdu families or the Pakistani families use the opportunity quite a lot, and Chinese and the Italian families do not. Probably they have enough books at home. That's our interpretation. So in some literacy environment and activities vary from community to community. Urdu-speaking Pakistani families have fewer home language resources, Italian equal, Chinese more resources in English than in Chinese. Then we look at expectations. In these expectations, we want to measure whether they expect their children to be literate or to know some literacy skills upon the entry of the first year in school. So about 5 years old. By 5 years old, when they go to school, what do they expect the children can do in terms of reading and writing, or read vocabulary or letters and so on and so forth. So we ask them, and very different expectations. The Chinese ask a lot more, so do the Urdu families, but not much expectation for their Urdu language, but very, very high demanding on their English. Whereas the Italian families do not demand much. They want their children to be happy to play. Okay, and we also ask them if there's any other things they wish that the children could do, and we have, this different answers. And the Pakistani parents said English literacy skills, yeah, that's very important, communication skills in Urdu, but not reading and writing, where Chinese parents emphasize on math, science, speaking English, comprehension, ability, communication skills. It's very, very demanding. So the Italians want their children to have communication skills, to play, to have fun, to play with language and not really read and write. All right, I think, so because the different ideologies and different practices, they use different strategies in the family. Many of them do not really understand the cognitive advantages in bilingualism, and some of them do not really read. I think quite many of them, when we ask them, do you read any parental magazines? And the Italian group, yes, not the Chinese and Urdu families. Okay. So what can we say from all this data I've shown you? So basically, family language policy from my data shows that there are 3 types of families, in my opinion. One is a very conscious bilingual policy family. The other is implicit policy, laissez-faire, do whatever you want to do, but I implicitly control you, not explicitly control you. And the other one is also laissez-faire, but this laissez-faire let children do whatever they want to do and tend to have a language attrition, situation. So eventually, this type of family language policy will turn into a monolingual family language practice. So to conclude, I don't have any conclusion, but I will throw these questions back to you. Maybe you can continue with your discussion and your research projects. So I would ask, how should parents be informed about the various effects of bilingualism with regard to the cognitive and social cultural development? How should interactions among different policy levels, that is state level, institutional level, and family level, be established to promote bilingualism in Singapore or in Canada, also here in the UK? So what should be done in public discourse to inform and influence parental ideology? And finally, what linguistic mechanism should parents provide to ensure bilingual or multilingual development? So I will end my talk here, and thank you very much. This is in Mandarin and Polish, if there's anyone understand Polish, and the last one is Arabic. Am I right? People who speak Arabic could be. I'm just trying to learn the language because of our project. Yeah. Thank you.